What if your D&D campaign let you play as a dragon, or forced you to choose sides in a war where no one was really the hero? Maybe it could drop you into a land of dinosaurs and forgotten empires, all hidden inside the planet that you are on. Well, these were real Dungeons and Dragons settings from the 1990s, and many players completely missed them. Let's dive into the strange experiments of late TSR settings today on Daddy Rolled a One. Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin. This is another video in my series on the history of early tabletop role-playing games, including Dungeons and Dragons. It's also part of my sub-series that I'm doing on early tabletop role-playing game settings, specifically D&D settings. I've done a few videos on settings before, like on Greyhawk, Dark Sun, and other settings like that, Ravenloft as an example. But today I'm going to be talking about some lesser known settings. So most people have heard of those settings before, Dragonlance and Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, as I said. And even ones that maybe aren't as big, but you've still heard of them, like Planescape as an example, or Dark Sun. But the settings that I'm going to be talking about today are some of the ones that kind of maybe flew under the radar a little bit so far from what I've seen on the post. I left a community post kind of asking people. And one of these in particular, which is going to be the middle one I talk about, is a setting that a lot of people seem to not know about at all. And I don't remember really hearing too much about it even back in the day. I only knew about it, I think, because they mentioned it in Dragon Magazine. I never saw it in a store or anything like that. But these were official settings that came out from TSR. Now, if you know a little bit about your TSR history from this era in the 1990s, especially in the 1990s, TSR was getting really, really focused on releasing just a ton of different settings, usually for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition. And that started back in 1989. And they released between 1989 and 1992, they released a different setting every year. So Spelljammer in 1989, Ravenloft in 1990, Dark Sun in 1991, and then Al-Qadim in 1992. Now, in 1993, they took a little bit of a break and they didn't release a new setting that year. But then in 1994, they came back and released 3 new settings in 1994. So they did a cleaned up version of Ravenloft, like sort of a revised version of Ravenloft. They also released Planescape, came out in 1994. And then the first setting that we're going to be talking about today here in just a second, which was a box set for a setting called the Council of Wyrms, 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 for those of you who are listening and not watching. And what's even more amazing, I think, is that all 3 of those settings came out within about 2 months of each other, sort of in that April to May time period of 1994. They weren't spread out during the year. So this was this era of like these boxed set settings. And TSR was just crazy about putting them out, churning them out one after the other, as you heard there. And they just kept producing them. And it was going to get to the point, and I did talk about this before, especially in my more recent video where I talked about the differences in second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons versus first edition Advanced. But this proliferation of settings is one of the things that's going to have a negative impact on TSR and actually cause them to have a lot of financial difficulty to the point where the company is going to go out of business. It's not the only reason. There were a lot of reasons involved with this, especially a lot of the deals that they had with their printers and their storage facilities and all this kind of stuff, their distributors. But one of the things that was happening was that they were producing all of these different settings. And what was happening was that people were starting to kind of gravitate toward just a specific setting that they liked, and they would ignore all of the other products that were coming out for D&D unless it was made for that particular setting that they liked. So I don't think anyone foresaw that coming. And so it created what they said, it created fans of settings, not fans of D&D, and it kind of fractured their player base. So they were probably selling the same amount of stuff in total, but that was spread across a lot of different groups of people, and they were producing so many different settings that they weren't selling all of them, as of their printings. And so things are being returned and they're having to pay people back and then figure out what to do with all these things. So that was part of the problem that they were going to have. It was sort of like this idea of like one setting per gamer almost. It was just a glut of product. So, but amid all of that, they kept trying these new experiments. So that's what's really fun about these things, is that they're all very, very different from each other. And I think you're going to see that today in these three settings that we're going to look at. So what we're going to look at today is the Council of Wyrms from 1994 box set. And then we're going to look at a setting late TSR era. And it was being worked on before TSR was acquired by Wizards of the Coast, but it is going to be published during like the first year or two of the Wizards of the Coast takeover, but it was still when TSR was being treated as a separate, distinct company. So it is a TSR product technically, although it was published in the Wizards of the Coast area, but it's Wizards of the Coast before Wizards was bought out by Hasbro. So in 1998, a setting that was published across three different books or three different products called Jakandor. I'm going to call it Jakandor. It could be Jakandor, but I'm going to call it Jakandor, Jakandor. And that was the setting from 1998. And then we're going to look at the last part of the video, we're going to look at the Hollow World setting for the world of Mystara from 1990. So you'll notice here that I'm not going in chronological order, and that's on purpose. I'm doing that for a very specific reason, because I'm going to start with the setting that I think is actually the most unique of the three and the most different, but the one also that is would be the hardest to run today, or the hardest to kind of like grab ideas and like drop them into a game. All right. Because that is one of the things that I'm going to be talking about with all these settings, is not just what the setting is. I'm going to talk about the history of why the setting was made, who was responsible for creating it, what was happening at TSR at the time that caused that setting to be created. But then I'm also going to go over some ideas that you could steal and use in your games today, whether you're playing an OSR style game, whether you're playing Shadow Dark, you could be playing 5e, you could be playing Pathfinder, maybe you're playing Daggerheart, any of those games, you can find ideas in here that you can use in games like that. Okay. And then I'm going to go to Jakandor next, because it's getting a little bit closer to, I guess, what you would call a more traditional setting. And there are, I would think, there are more ideas in that one that you can kind of incorporate. And then last, I would say Hollow World. Well, I think it is, for me, maybe the coolest of the settings, because I just like that sort of aesthetic to it, that Hollow World vibe, and we'll talk about that when we get there. You could consider that to be the most, I guess, quote unquote, traditional of the settings, but also it has a lot of rules in there, a lot of rules that are easy to take and incorporate into a game today, especially if you're playing an OSR style game. There will be rules in there that you can use. Okay. So that's why I'm presenting it in that particular order. And so that's what you can look forward to in this video. I'm going to have a segment for each of these different settings. And, I'll just kind of walk through like how it was put together, sort of the legacy, and then again, those stealable content ideas that you can use in your games today. So if learning about this history of this kind of stuff, and also learning about how you can pull out ideas and mechanics from older products and then use them in your games from today. If you like that kind of content, then please take a few seconds to like the video, double check to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. This is the first setting definitely make sure that you've adjusted the settings on that bell icon, so that YouTube will notify you when I upload new videos like this one. 3 different books in it. And it was intended to be all like self-contained. So it's written here by Bill Slavicsek, and this is published in 1994. Now, Bill was born in 1971 and started playing D&D in 1977. So he started playing even before I did. I didn't start until 1981. And in college, he was he wanted originally to be a comic book artist. That was kind of his focus. But he's later going to switch over to journalism and communications. In 1986, he's going to end up working at West End Games, and he's going to be one of the primary people responsible for the Star Wars role-playing game that came out from West End Games, and is one of people's favorite versions of the Star Wars game. it produced a lot of material, and Bill kind of ended up overseeing all of that. And a lot of that material was tied into like the comic books, the novels. It was all kind of considered together. It's now what I think they call the expanded universe or something like that for Star Wars. So it's not official, but a lot of that stuff is slowly starting to become official, that they're starting to move content like Admiral Thrawn, Grand Admiral Thrawn, if you saw him in either Star Wars Rebels or in the Ahsoka series, he shows up. So he started out as one of these expanded universe type of people. And so that's kind of been happening little by little. But anyway, Bill Slavicsek is considered to sort of be like one of the primary, repositories of knowledge of Star Wars, like history and lore and all that kind of stuff. But he worked on Star Wars, also worked on the game Torg at West End Games, which is sort of a genre and time jumping game. It's really quite fun. I've played it a few times. And then in 1991, he became a freelancer. He's eventually going to come to work for TSR in 1993. And he's going to work on a variety of different products, of course, over time. But he's going to make it through into the 3E era. So he was one of the primary people that was responsible for overseeing the development of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, like an overseer kind of position. Okay, so now one of the things that's interesting is that back in the TSR era, in the early, late 80s, early 90s, he's going to write the PHBR, which is the Player's Handbook Reference Series book, the Complete Book of Humanoids. So I did a whole video on the PHBR series, the brown books, the brown leatherette series. And the Complete Book of Humanoids was written by Bill Slavicsek. And shortly after he wrote that, he was asked by TSR to create something else in that same vein, but with where you could have dragons that you were playing as like your player characters. So that's Bill Slavicsek. Now, Jeff Easley does the cover art that you see here, and his dragons are pretty easy to pick out. So he always has kind of like these human-looking arms. I think it's interesting, the gold dragon. Oh, actually, both dragons are wearing like these bracers. But he does the cover art. We've talked about Jeff Easley before. And then the interior art here is going to be done by Glenn Angus, who unfortunately died back in 2007. But he does a lot of the inking in this particular product for the pencil work that's being done by another artist named Arnie. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Swekel. It's Swekel. Swekel. So he's going to do the pencils on a lot of the interior art, and then Glenn Angus is going to do the inking for that. But Glenn also does a lot of different work over the years. He's going to do work on the Genies and Giants for the 3.5 edition of the Monster Manual for D&D. And he does sort of like the Norse Pantheon for the 3E version of the Deities and Demigods book. That's just a small example. Okay, and then Arnie Swekel is still with us, still doing art, was self-taught, kind of. And has been playing D&D since 1982, and worked on like the 3rd edition Manual of the Planes and the Epic Level Handbook, and did some card artwork for Magic the Gathering. And then he's working currently for Raven Software on like online video game art. Okay, so you had all of these different settings that had come out, and then Council of Wyrms is going to be one of the 3 that comes out in 1994, and it was intended to sort of be a one and done box set adventure. So you see here, even on the cover, it doesn't say campaign setting, it says Council of Wyrms Adventure, because I think they didn't really know what to do with this. It wasn't intended to be expanded. They weren't going to publish modules and all that other kind of stuff for it. It was a box set that you would just have and you would play and you would be done with it. Okay, so it's going to include 3 books, each 64 pages. So there's like a rules book, a campaigns book, and an adventures book. And then it's going to have 3 full color posters. One is like a size comparison chart. One is like a map. And then one is going to show all these different dragon clans and their relationships to each other. And then it's going to have 12 full color reference cards. All right. And then in the late 2E era, 1999, Council of Wyrms is going to be republished as a single hardback book in what they called the Campaign Options series. So there was a whole series in the late 2 2E era that, retroactively now people, including me, call it the 2.5 era, but it's like the player's options series. That's like skills and powers and combat and tactics. And then there was also the DM's options series, and there's going to be one campaign options series, just one, and that's going to be the Council of Wyrms. So that's 1999. That's just a year before D&D third edition is going to be published. Okay. So the premise of the game here is that you are going to be playing as a dragon, or you can play as a dragon. Okay, so and the dragons in here, there are three different kinds. There are the standard chromatic dragons and the metallic dragons that you're used to, but they're also going to add in gem dragons. Now, gem dragons had debuted in an article in Dragon Magazine number 37. So very early on in Dragon Magazine history. And then later on, they're going to be kind of revived and brought back as official dragons in Monster Compendium 14. So you can tell there how many compendiums there were, which was the Monstrous Compendium Fiendfolio Appendix. And the gem dragons from that article in number 37 are going to come into official D&D. Now, the gem dragons are neutral, so that's why they're different. So chromatic are evil and metallic are good, and then the gem dragons are neutral. So it's going to talk about all the different dragon types here and how you can play them and all their different ability score adjustments. You see that here. But you also see they list elf, dwarf, gnome, and then you see this thing here. It says 1/2 GD. Those are half dragons, and we'll talk about that. But that'd be a half gold dragon, half silver dragon, half bronze dragon. Okay, so those are your different character class options, and we'll keep going through these as we go through this. So, but that's the premise, is that you can play a dragon, and they intended this setting to be something that you could drop into any campaign. And so that was one of the design goals of Bill Slavicsek, was he created this series of islands called Io's Blood Isles. And they're called Io's Blood Isles because Io is supposed to be like one of the first dragons or the first dragon or whatever. And his children, like the other dragon, they were fighting all the time, and he wanted to create a place where they could feel safe and like work together. And so he cuts himself open, and his blood spills into the ocean, and it turns into these it hardens, and it creates these islands where the dragons can live and ideally live in harmony. And that's really a lot of the premise of this. It's the political machinations between these different types of dragons to get supremacy, but they all are living on the island together. And it's like, when are they going to work together, and when are they going to be at odds with each other, and that kind of thing. Okay, so it's aimed at very high-powered epic levels of play right from the beginning, because you're playing a dragon, usually. All right. And so those dragons are going to be very, very powerful. So this just kind of goes into the background of like the dragons and things. And it talks about this idea of kindred, which are different, what we would call, humanoid races, dwarves, elves, and gnomes, that are working with certain types of dragons. And each different race has different dragons that they're more aligned to wanting to work with. And so you see here the preferred kindred for the different dragon types for elf, dwarf, and gnome. Then you have half dragons. Okay, and it gets into those. And then you later on, it's going to talk about humans and where they come in here. And we'll get to that in a second in another book. So, this is really just kind of like the mechanics. It shows you the hit dice and the experience point tables for your different dragons. So you're going to start out as a hatchling at like 0 experience points. But even like if you start out as a hatchling gold dragon at 0, you already have 10 hit dice. So that's your, quote unquote, first level. That's like your 0 level, technically. And then to go up to first level, which is really the level here is going to be tied to the age of the dragon. What age of dragon are you? But to get to first level as a gold dragon, you have to gain 500,000 experience points. So that's really like the biggest. And then, the other ones go down from there. So if you wanted to be a brass, emerald, or black dragon, you only, quote unquote, only need 32,000 experience points to get to level 1, but you only start out with 6 hit dice as opposed to 10 for a gold dragon. So that's how they kind of balance this. It's really like the amount of experience points you're going to need before you ever level up. So I mean, 500,000 experience points, you're going to be playing for a long time before you get to that point. Okay, so then it goes into proficiencies and abilities, and this is really interesting. They break out the combat. It gets its own combat proficiency. So this was something that was kind of new. Normally, you had weapon proficiencies in second edition. This is going to give you combat proficiencies, which are kind of, sort of, similar in a manner to like feats in say third edition where you had like combat feats, martial feats, because you're going to have like these combat proficiencies in here for dragons are going to be like aerial combat, bite, breath weapon, claw attack, claw attack. There's kicks, plummets, snatch, stall. There's all kinds of things. Tail mace, tail slap. And then it gets into your non-combat proficiencies. And these are things like alertness, ancient history, appraising, astrology, burrow, chanting, debate. You can see them listed here on the screen if you're watching the video instead of just listening. So kindred bond is a really interesting one. So this is where the dragons and their demi-humans have to both take the proficiency. And if they do, it allows them to create this bond where they sort of have this empathic link. And it can kind of help them during combat. So what it says here is that if a dragon and its kindred are cooperating in a combat situation, the bond lets them coordinate their movements and giving both a +1 attack bonus and a +1 AC bonus. And it says the bond is especially important for dragon riders. And then it says hatchlings cannot take this proficiency. So they're creating, that's like world building, right? You're having a game mechanic that's based within the world to figure out how to implement this idea of having these kindred that are serving these dragons, right? So most demi-humans in this world are going to be like subservient, or sometimes they're slaves. But some of them are like these kindred, like they have this, like, it's not a symbiotic relationship, but it's a very close relationship with their sort of dragon overlord kind of things. Okay, so and then, just have others of these non-weapon proficiencies here. Stewardship is another fun one, bottom right-hand side over here, where it says younger dragons and kindred often take the stewardship proficiency to help govern the territory of their clans. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like these higher level games. There's a little bit of domain level play built into this, that your dragon or their kindred, servants or whatever you want to call them, are overseeing certain areas of control. And so you would take this stewardship non-weapon proficiency in order to be able to rule it more efficiently. So it gives the administrative knowledge and skills necessary to handle the day-to-day running of a dragon domain. As most older dragons have little patience for such matters, it falls to trusted vassals and younger family members to handle the proper arrangements. So you can understand the technical business of land and estate management, as well as politics and personalities of the ruling class. But it says like a failed check leads to some blunder or miscalculation whose ramifications are left to the DM. So it's a really interesting proficiency because it doesn't really give you a giant bonus to understand like what a successful check is going to do, other than you're not going to have a blunder, so it's almost like the mechanics are more on the negative side as opposed to the benefits you get on the positive side. Okay. But you have survival, swimming, trick, whatever, tracking. And then it gets into special and innate abilities. And one of the ones that's going to be in here is dragon fear. And it talks about how dragons have a fear effect. This is something that you see in a lot of versions of Dungeons and Dragons. And so they're just giving you a little bit more mechanics here. And at the beginning, it talks about how your charisma can affect this. But your dragon fear can basically cause creatures with fewer than one hit die to flee in panic for 46 rounds. And if they have more than one hit die, there's certain things that might happen up to and including them taking a -2 penalty to all attacks and damage rolls for certain things. And, there's saving throws involved and things like that for some of these, but that's one of the things that dragons have. So it gets into spells, and most dragons are going to be spellcasters, although there's a little bit more to that. And we'll get to that in a second. So then you get into your section here on draconic combat, whatever. And for each different dragon type, and it has like the typical tactics for those specific dragons, and then their physical attacks, their breath weapon, that kind of thing. So this is really useful stuff if you're not playing as a dragon PC, to kind of have some indication on dragon by dragon, what are their typical tactics when they're in combat. Right, so you've got some player character record sheets and things like that, and then you're going to get to the campaign book. Now, so this is interesting. That early part was like the rules, and then the campaign book, which you'd normally think would be in DMs. This is where all the information on like how to build your player characters is going to be in. It's kind of an interesting organization to the book. But it's going to get into the origin of Io's Blood Island chain. So I did talk about that. So this is the background. So it does have like that campaign background in here. And then it gets in this idea of the Council of Wyrms. And the short version of this is that Io sets it up so that it's basically a sort of democratically run situation where the representatives of the different dragon clans send their like most senior member to come and like hash things out at this council and figure out how things are going to work. And it's like one from each of like the metallic, the chromatic, and the gem dragons. And they figure out how they're going to, like I said, handle situations. And there's different things that can happen. There could be combat to the death. There could be, involvement from like your kindred members, like all these different kinds of things, right? So there's your council. Airy talks about it there. And how to summon the council. And then it's going to get into like the different kinds of dragons again, like dragon kind, hordes and dragons sleep. So one of the things that happens here is like dragons, accumulate their hordes. And that's one of the things that you have your bonded horde and your accumulated horde. And so hordes are very important to dragons. So it talks about like with the loss of a portion of your bonded horde, you lose one ability per round of time as outlined on table 17. Okay. So, and it's determined randomly, like which ability that you lose. And it says, and a dragon could die if its bonded horde is not recovered or replaced. So the bonded horde is the treasure that a dragon has used to gain levels. So that's part of like why those experience points things are so high, is because it's tied to the horde that you're going to gather and then keep and hold on to. Okay. So you can't advance beyond your current level without an intact bonded horde. So it's really interesting, this idea of like how these hordes are tied to the gaining of levels and experience points. So it talks about age and death and beyond, rogue dragons, religion, and the dragon gods, all the kind of stuff that you would expect from a campaign set. Now it's going to get into the rules for like player characters. And so it talks about dragon PCs and other campaigns. It's actually going to tell you in here that they don't recommend that you do this. So transporting dragon PCs into other AD&D campaign settings is not recommended for a variety of reasons. Dragon PCs are generally too powerful and too disruptive to be integrated smoothly. So it says the setting was designed to hold the scale and epic grandeur of Dragon PCs. In most standard AD&D campaigns, Dragon PCs would quickly tire the slower pace, and the years would crawl by, etc., etc. It talks about awarding experience, and it says Dragon PCs need a lot of experience points to advance in level, as well as a lot of treasure. How much experience and treasure DMs decide to award depends on how many adventures he or she wants to run per Dragon Age category. So it talks all about that, and how you're going to give out these massive amounts of treasure. And then it gets into your fun dragon kits, starting with the boringly named Dragon PC kit, which is just basically your standard dragon. So as a reminder, if you're not familiar with this term kit, so kits were something that debuted in a few different products, but they're mostly talked about in that PHBR series that I talked about earlier, the Brown Leatherette books, which are the player handbook reference series. And it's like the complete book of fighters, the complete book of elves, the complete book of gnomes and halflings, like whatever it is. And in there, they talk about this idea of kits, which are like little tweaks that you make to your character class in order to kind of evoke a specific, vision that you have. So like fighter kits include things like savages and like there's not a musketeer, but it's like it's kind of like that, like a Renaissance era fighter. I can't remember the name for that particular kit. Swashbuckler. There's a swashbuckler kit. And then it has things like for thieves, they'll have like different kinds of thieves. It's like, are you a burglar, or are you like someone who's like, like you're the in-between guy who's moving things around, you're a smuggler, things like that. So I'm doing a horrible job right now trying to come up with the names of the kits off the top of my head, but those are kits. And so what you get is you get a description of like sort of how you're supposed to act or what your goals are. And then it will give you like a small mechanical change to your class. It'll usually say like you get this extra bonus, and then it will balance that by giving you a little bit of a negative, right? So, or a penalty. So it could be something like, oh, it could be a change in your armor or weapon abilities. It could be for certain magic using kits. It could be you can't cast certain types of spells. Or it could be a lot of times they use as a negative, or a positive for both. They'll use reaction roll modifiers, which were a big thing in this era of D&D, like rolling on that 2d6 reaction roll table. I talk about that all the time here on the channel. It's one of my favorite tables in early D&D, to see how the other side's going to react when you encounter them. And it could mean the difference between having to get into combat or being able to talk your way out of it. And so having a negative to that, it could be a pretty big detriment unless, your GM doesn't really use that. And that's the problem, is that a lot of people didn't use that reaction roll table. So having a negative penalty was really not a penalty at all. And so people say, oh, the kits aren't balanced. And it's like, well, they're not balanced if you're not using all of the rules that you're intended to. But in any event, the Dragon PC is the first kit here. Then there's also going to be a Dragon Mage. You're going to have a Dragon Priest, as you see here. And then there's going to be a Dragon Psionicist. So psionics was introduced in the Complete Book of Psionics, the Complete Handbook of Psionics, in that Leatherette series. And they're going to allow dragons to be psionicists in this campaign setting. And then you have your Kindred Demi-Human kits. And so you see here, it says, from the Complete Book of Dwarves, these are the kits that a dwarf kindred could be. Animal Master, Clans Dwarf, Hearthguard, Battle Rager, Highborn, Sharpshooter, Ritual Priest, Diplomat, Entertainer, Locksmith, Pest Controller, Trader, Vermin Slayer, and Wayfinder. That's just for dwarves. And then they have kits that are acceptable from the Complete Bard's Handbook for dwarves, elves, and gnomes. And then you have other kits from the Complete Book of Elves, like archers, wilderness runners, war wizards, elven minstrels. And then from the Complete Book of Gnomes and Halflings, and this is for gnomes only, you've got breach gnomes, goblin stickers, rock tenders, image makers, stalkers, things like that. Okay. And then there's a kit that's open to any kindred, which is the Dragon Rider kit. And so that is for people, it is what it says. You're riding a dragon, which is a pretty cool concept for a lot of people. And then you have your half dragon kits. And so then it's going to talk about half dragons, and their kit is called the Exile. It says any half dragon can be an exile, although exiles are usually thieves. So remember, a kit is not a class, so you have to take a character class, and then your kit comes on top of that. Okay, so and then you have the Ward, which is another half dragon class that you can take. So that's for a half dragon who has a patron. And then the human kit in here is called the Dragon Slayer. So that's kind of how humans fit into the setting. Is if you encounter humans in here, most likely they've traveled to this land in order to try to slay dragons, and that's their goal. And so they're going to be in conflict with any kindred who are aligned with the dragons, right? So that's kind of where a lot of the conflict is going to come from here. Conflict first and foremost between the different types of dragons and their clans and their kindred that follow them, but then also the outsiders, the humans coming in. Okay, so then so you see some of your cards here, and it identifies like some NPCs or characters that are in this setting. So there's a gnome kindred, Kunuf Del. There's Infernus the Draco Lich. There's an elf vassal. So you see all those here on the list if you're looking at the video. You've got your encounter tables. Okay, and then the last book in here is going to be book 3, and this is the Adventures book. And I'm not going to get into the adventures too much. It's just, there's quite a few of them, and they just talk about, like the first one is Not the Draka, and it starts about starting the adventure, and this one you play as hatchlings. And there's ogres in here, and there's a hatchery, and there's first contact. And then there's one on colorblinded. So now you're moving up to 2nd and 3rd level dragon PCs, and you're visiting an amethyst dragon vassal village. Okay. And then you're going to get into the next adventure here coming up, which is the Terrible Alliance. Okay, and this is the culmination. So these adventures kind of go in order. And so this is the culmination of the first 2 adventures. And so now you'd be a juvenile age at 4th level. And you're trying to stop a frost giant marauders who have been plaguing the northern islands. So that's the adventures book. You see some maps here for the adventures. They're kind of cool, I guess. There's, yet more adventures. There's Stolen Hordes. And that's going to kind of be it for the adventures here, and for quickly going through that setting, quickly in quotes, I guess. But we see in here for the mechanics and the play style. You see there's rules for the dragon progression, and we talked about that, and dragon age progression, which is how your character is going to increase in experience and level. And you've got the cool kits, you've got the half dragons, you've got dragonkin, all that kind of stuff presented in here as options. And the focus of the game, really, of the setting, I would say, is really, it's not on fighting. You think like, oh, I'm playing a dragon, like it's going to be all about combat. It's really more about politics and alliances. There is clan warfare, but I think the political aspect is pushed much more heavily in this. So the setting was pretty praised for its originality, because people have been wanting to play dragons from the dawn of Dungeons and Dragons. So I talked about this recently in my video on the history of monster PCs and Dungeons and Dragons. But in the very first version of the game, 1974, Gary Gygax says, like, there's no reason that you couldn't play as a dragon. Like, he lists the character classes in the book. He says, but beyond that, if you want to play as a dragon, you just have to start out as a young dragon, and then as you go older, like, that's how you're going to level. He specifically says that back in 1974. And then 20 years later, we have a setting finally that does exactly that, which I think is kind of cool. But the setting was a little bit criticized for its balance. And as you see here, it says, like, it's not designed to, like, interact with other settings. So this idea of these islands kind of being set apart, where where the dragons live. I think the idea was that, well, you could drop it into your existing setting and just say it's been hidden and nobody knew it was there. But then it tells you, well, you shouldn't put dragon PCs into a standard setting, into a regular setting. So I kind of think it works better as as a standalone. And I wouldn't necessarily think of running it as like a long-term, like years and years and years campaign. I think like a few months of doing this, like have a goal and something like that, but then, kind of wrap it up. I think that it would get a little bit tiresome to just have this all-powerful dragon all the time. But that said, I've never played in this setting. So I'd love to hear from you folks if you played in settings like this, and if you played it long-term, like how did that work? Did you like it? Now let's talk about some of these mechanics that you can steal and use in your game. And they're mostly going to come in that book 2. I think you could probably figure that out with all the different kits and all the different like dragon types and things that we talked about in that particular section. So flipping around here because I'm looking for that section, and it's going to be for campaign rules and kits. So in the book 2. So first off, again, for dragon level PCs, instead of running it as a full campaign, I think that you could use dragons as PCs as sort of like a one-shot domain level adventure. And you could use it in a standard campaign, but like not integrating them. You could do a one-off where maybe you just play as dragons for one session. That's a one shot in the campaign that you normally do, but there's a reason. You'd have to come up with a reason as the DM is like why that's happening. But maybe dragons are really important in your campaign, and it could be fun for the players to play one of those dragons that their characters are aware of, like their main characters are aware of. So, or it could be like you could do maybe each PC is like a very young dragon, and they're trying to negotiate with the people of that world to kind of like, hey, leave us alone kind of thing. That could be a setting that you could do, or like an idea. I really like the idea of the Kindred Dragon Pact. So I think that you could do a setting like this where you don't have dragon PCs. The dragons are still, quote unquote monsters or NPCs, whatever you want to talk about. But the PCs could be these kindred, and that could be in any setting. And this idea of like having this empathic bond with a dragon where they get bonuses in combat. It doesn't have to be, like the +1 to AC and attacks. It could be different. Maybe it's different for each kind of dragon. It could be bonuses to certain skills if you use skill systems in your game. It could be things like that. But this idea of having this bond with the dragon, and then you could expand it to other powerful creatures. What if there's different creatures in the world that, as a vassal race, if you want to call it that, could have an empathic bond with? I think that's kind of a fun idea to explore for a setting. Now, another thing you could look at is the fear aura. I talked about that. That's kind of why I spent so much time on that. But I like this idea of fear auras, and you could apply that to like high-level PCs in a manner of speaking if you wanted to, and get to the idea of like when you reach 10th or 12th or 15th level, whatever it is, your PC, it's sort of like a reputation, but they're known for being very powerful. And first, or not first hit die, one hit die creatures, but like less than one hit die creatures might be afraid of you because they've heard rumors. And also you just have this aura about you that radiates that like you look like you mean business. And that's something that you could implement for your high level, if you're playing high level games. I think in high level games, it makes a lot of sense. You don't want a first level character walking around like that. But or maybe if you play epic level games, you could implement an idea like that, like 25th or 30th level characters or whatever. Something like if you play through the BECMI line, and you're in that masters section of like level 26 to level 36, that would be a perfect place to like implement an idea like this for your player characters, to radiate that kind of fear for people. Even if they're good aligned, people might still be afraid of them because they're almost otherworldly at that point with the levels of power that they have. Introducing the half dragon race as something I know a lot of people don't like Dragonborn as an example, but they're dealt with much differently in here. And I think it could be a fun idea to incorporate, and the mechanics are right here. And you could use these mechanics in pretty much any kind of, class and level OSR style type of game. And then I also kind of think the idea of treasure as growth and gaining levels, is an interesting concept. Now, OSR games do that very often, right? So your experience points are tied to how much gold that you're earning. We've talked about that a lot here on the channel. But modern games kind of go away from that. And the experience points goes back to the idea of like, you get experience points for killing monsters, or you get experience points because the DM says that you do. It's like narrative or story based. Like you finish the story, you finish the arc, so everybody levels up or everybody gets X number of experience points, like whatever it is, right? But you can use this idea of like amassing treasure could be a great idea for like a rogue PC and that has that goal of doing that in certain games, that their level base is not based on killing monsters. It's based on gaining a lot of treasure and moving up that way. So those are just some ideas. Now, as I told you, I do think that Council of Wyrms is one of the more difficult ones to kind of like try to pull some ideas out that you can use in a variety of different games. But as we go through the rest of the settings here, you're going to see that it becomes easier and easier, and there's more and more ideas. Okay. But that is our look at Council of Wyrms. And again, I would love to hear from people who played the setting. I remember when the setting came out, and mostly when I remember these things coming out, I didn't collect them. I wasn't playing second edition at the time, but I remember reading ads or articles in Dragon Magazine that talked about these settings. And this one, I wasn't really sure if it was going to appeal to me. So I've never been someone who's wanted to play a Dragon PC, but I would love to hear from you folks who did, and like, how was it fun? Did you like it? Did it work? Did you like the mechanics? Did you wish something was different? So share that in the comments below. But in the meantime, we're going to move on to one of the other settings, which is going to be Jakandor. Well, just like TSR liked to experiment back in the day, I also like to experiment on ideas outside of YouTube, and many of them are ways that you can support Daddy Roll to One. The first now is by becoming a patron. So you can join my Patreon at patreon.com/daddyroll1, and there you'll be signed up to receive exclusive monthly content that I'm putting out. As an example, I just released a 4-page adventure with exclusive maps and artwork. And this is not a reused map from somewhere else that I'm just adding descriptions to. This was created specifically for you, the patrons, and working with my friend artist Bill Green, who does a lot of the designs for my shop. And this one is called The Bone Mill. And I have, in addition to the adventure, I also have like a little video putting up like a time-lapse version of Bill doing the maps and the illustrations, so you can get a sense of what it looks like when he's in his creative process. And so you'll find that I've uploaded some tables on like weird fighter traits that you can use that are for the most part non-mechanical, so you could use them in any system that you like to kind of help distinguish your fighters and give ideas for how to make your characters maybe a little bit more creative. So I'm going to be releasing more and more content like that, and you can join this list of patrons who are contributing to help me to have more time and resources in order to focus on making more videos here on YouTube. The second thing you can do is by becoming a super fan. So you can join this list of folks who hit that little heart icon with the $sign in it and are contributing to the channel. And these are people that are going to get their names here listed in perpetuity for having contributed to the channel in the past. And I do want to point out there are some of these folks who contribute on every single video. Like within minutes of me dropping a video, there's certain people that will leave a super fan thanks. And I really, really appreciate it for the folks that are able to do that. It just means so much to me. And it does really help with helping upgrade equipment and helping me get access to like maybe buying some older versions of the material so that I can go over it in person here on the desktop instead of on a PDF. And then you can also buy some merchandise at my shop. You can buy a t-shirt, hoodie, mug, or tote bag at my spread shop. And you can buy paper goods like stickers, posters, and notebooks at my Redbubble shop. And these are all featuring exclusive designs that you'll only find from Daddy Roll the One. And speaking of my friend Bill Green, I work with him to design this new design. I know a lot of you out there aren't Dodger fans, and I totally get it. But I just thought that it was too funny to pass this up. So it's a little takeoff on the Jawa, like the Utini, but we did it with a Shohei Ohtani kind of spin to it. And so you can find that shirt design at my shop at Spread Shop. And then lastly, you can pick up my supplement for old school D&D style OSR adventure games, which is Alchemy, Explosives, and Inventions. So this is a 48-page supplement that includes different character backgrounds to make expert style characters, along with a ton of different random tables for them. It's got 3 character classes: the Alchemist, Demolitionist, and Inventor. It's got new equipment. It has a 3-story guild hall with maps, NPCs, rumors, secrets, adventure hooks. It's got inspirations and ideas for running expert themed campaigns. And you can find all of that at Drive-Thru RPG as either a soft cover print on demand like these, or as a POD, and they're available as either parchment color background like this, or you can get the plain white if that's easier on your eyes. So thank you so much for your consideration and support of Daddy Roll the One. All right, let's look at our next setting here, which is going to be the setting of Jakandor. So this is kind of an interesting one, because it was part of what was called the Odyssey line, late era advanced D&D second edition products. Now you'll notice some interesting things here on the cover of this particular book. So there are 3 books in this series. They were not published as a box set. They were published individually. So this is Jakandor, Island of War. And you see here at the top, it no longer says second edition. So they've gotten rid of the second edition moniker, even though this is a second edition book. And the TSR logo has changed. This is very late era TSR. And this is, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, going to be published during the time period where Wizards of the Coast has acquired TSR. But they're basically just continuing with the products and lines that TSR was working on at the time of the acquisition. So this is something that, again, that was in the pipeline already, that was being worked on. And so they're just going to publish it. And again, it's going to be labeled as TSR, not as Wizards of the Coast. And again, this is late era. But this Odyssey line, so what's that about? So this is a really interesting thing. It was a very short-lived line, but it was intended for smaller kind of standalone campaign settings or adventure products that could be easily inserted like into any kind of D&D world. And the idea was that, TSR used this to publish material for a variety of different things. So one of the things that they used it for was for stuff like dead settings. So as an example, they're going to resurrect a setting called Red Steel, which was part of the Mystara setting. And they're going to resurrect that as a setting called the Savage Coast. And it's not a different setting. It's just they're going to resurrect it as part of the AD&D second edition line. But they're going to put it under this Odyssey thing. So they used it for like the settings like that, but they also used it for like different experimental ideas. So the first one was called, I think it's Tale of the Comet, something like that, but it's sort of like a science fiction fantasy mashup, including like elves with laser guns and things like that. So very, very different kind of thing, but it's intended as like a standalone. So it's not going to be a full blown setting where they're going to be, selling modules and monster compendium, supplements and all that kind of stuff. These are sort of like standalone settings. Now, the problem with this was that it confused a lot of buyers because they're all labeled as Odyssey. And so I think there was a thought that they all work together, and they didn't. The only thing that this line has in common is that all these things are different, and they're short standalone things that weren't intended to be used long term, and they weren't intended to be used together. But because they were labeled as Odyssey, a lot of people thought they were supposed to be used together. So it was an experiment. It didn't really work, but that's kind of what you have here. So Jakandor is a setting that was being developed by Jeff Grubb, and we've talked about Jeff here many times on the channel. I think probably I would say, a lot of different things that he did for TSR over the years. But one of the more famous ones, I think, is the development of the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, which I have a whole video about that particular game. But he left TSR in 1994, but he was working on this setting before that. And the idea of it was that it was going to be about two opposing cultures, which each believe that they are the heroes in the setting. Okay. So, that was kind of a different approach. There's not good guys and bad guys. There's just people. And either one of them could be good or bad, depending on how you want to look at it, or they could both be good. They're just on opposing sides. They're against each other. And he says that it was kind of inspired by a game called White Bear and Red Moon, which was about two opposing forces. This is a Greg Stafford game that is eventually going to be the inspiration for the game world of Glorantha, which is the setting for the RuneQuest game by Chaosium, if you've heard of RuneQuest and Glorantha. So, but it started before that. I think 1975 is when White Bear and Red Moon came out, and that was about, two opposing cultures of both of them barbarians. In this case, for Jakandor, one of the cultures is going to be barbarians and the other one's not. And we're going to get into that and see how kind of interesting and fun that is. But it was intended to be 3 different books. So there was going to be one book for each of the 2 different cultures. And then there was going to be a third book that was going to be adventure ideas and sort of like your campaign setting book, right? And your maps and things like that. And then there was supposed to be a fourth component, which was going to be a novel that Jeff Grubb was going to write himself. He's going to pass off the writing of the actual setting and the different cultures and stuff to other people. But the novel he was going to write. Now, the novel's never going to be published. TSR did tell him that he could publish it later on, or I guess it's Wizards of the Coast that is, told him that he could publish it as long as he stripped out all the references and the IP and stuff, but he could publish the novel. And he's not going to do that because he said it would be too difficult to kind of separate it. It was too closely tied into this setting that he had developed. Okay. So what Jeff Grubb says is that with these 3 books, the idea was that this would be another one of these kind of like one and done type of settings, but very specifically something that like you're not going to play long term, but it was intended that you could play it like maybe over summer break is what Jeff Grubb said. So, over for a few months over the summer, and then you'd move on to something else, right? So that's why there's going to be no supplements, no additional material for these types of games. So the 3 books are going to be The Island of War, which is the one we're looking at here. And it's going to cover the culture of the Nor barbarians, Nor, Knorr. So I know my wife likes to use the little Nor packets when she makes vegetable dip at their house. So, but it's the same spelling, but these are the Nor barbarians. And then Isle of Destiny. So we'll just take a look at that really quick here. This is going to be the book for the culture of the Chiranti, and they're necromancers. So that's the difference here. These are not like barbarian warriors. They are like spellcasting necromancers. And I like the art here. It's pretty cool. And then the third book is going to be the Land of Legend that you see here. And again, this is sort of like your adventure book and your, your campaign guide and all that kind of stuff. So now let's go back to the Isle of War. So Isle of War and Isle of Destiny each are going to consist of like a roughly 132-page book, player's guide, and then a 32-page saddle-stitched DM's lore, or stapled, DM lore book. And then there's going to come up like a fold-out map of the island that's like roughly 4 letter-sized pages. So that's kind of what you're going to get in here. Land of Legend is the GM book and adventures, as I said. So the main author you see here, it's Kirk. I'm going to say Botula. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. It could be Botula. And apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But Kirk is going to write both the Island of War and the Isle of Destiny, and was intended to also write the Land of Legends book that we talked about, that GM and adventure book. However, he was Kirk. What I read was that he was like essentially fatigued. He had done a lot of work on these first two books, and he was kind of like wiped out. And so he's going to pass the writing for Isle of Legend over to one of the people that he worked on the Isle of Destiny on, which is Dale Donovan. And Dale Donovan is going to be the one who's going to primarily be the author of the Land of Legend. Okay. So Rick Botula was a friend of Jeff Grubb going all the way back to like the late 70s. He was still in high school at the time, but he was playing in D&D campaigns with people at, I think it's Purdue University, but he was playing with university kids even though he was still in high school. And one of the campaigns that he played in was Jeff Grubb's campaign. And so Jeff had developed like a friendship with him, and Kirk is eventually going to become a judge for one of the AD&D open tournaments that was run by TSR, and that's going to end up getting him hired by TSR. That's one of the connections that he got. So a couple of the things that he didn't do a lot. He wasn't very prolific during his career with TSR, but he did write the Complete Book of Villains. That's a 2e book. Wrote a few Dark Sun adventures, and then he worked on some stuff for the third version of the Monstrous Compendium for the Ravenloft campaign setting. So that's Kirk. It's a relatively short career as far as what I could find, but if anybody knows more, please share that, because I think that what was done here was really, really interesting, and I would have loved to have seen more work from him in the future. I did read that he had some health issues, so I hope that he is doing okay. All right, now Dale Donovan, who worked on the Land of Legend one, did a lot of work at TSR. He started working in the role-playing game industry in 1989, and then at TSR, and he's in the late era, he's going to be doing a lot of work on like the Forgotten Realms, and he does some other stuff, but like I said, mostly Forgotten Realms. He's going to be an editor of Dragon Magazine for quite a while, and he's going to straddle the time period of working for TSR and Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. He works there for combined across all three companies for a total of 12 years, but he's going to start freelancing in 2002. So now, interestingly, the art throughout these books, there's a lot of different artists in here, but what I find really fascinating is that it's a mix of kind of like old art or old artists, original artists, people like David S. LaForce, okay, who does a lot of the cartography. If you've watched the channel before, that's Diesel. And he started out as like an illustrator, and then he kind of moves into cartography. But this is, at this point, he'd been working at TSR for almost 25 years. So, on D&D, doing art and cartography. So I think that's cool. But then you're going to get some, I'm going to call them newer TSR artists, like very late era. So Todd Lockwood, and I think his name's Randy. It's RK Post, but I believe his name is actually Randy. And those are artists that are going to straddle into that time period of like Wizards of the Coast. And you're going to see them do artwork on Magic the Gathering cards and other products as well. And a lot of that 3E era art especially was done by those two artists. But they're making some, I don't want to say their debut here, but some of their more famous work is they're going to do, covers and art here on these products. Okay. So let's get into this and look at, like what we're looking at with this setting. So I talked about the idea that it is it's essentially, the premise is that it's these two warring societies, cultures. And one is going to be these barbarian types, and they are actually the outsiders, as the barbarians. And then you've got these like magic user types, these necromancers, and called the Chironti. So the Nord barbarians that we're looking at here, they are more honor bound. They're very ritual driven. Okay. In terms of their culture, and they're supported by like these animated, like totemic juggernauts. As an example, they're sort of like primitive mechs almost. And Jeff Grubb like insisted like those needed to be included in the setting. Okay, so that's why they're in here. It's because that was part of Jeff Grubb's original idea. So you see this idea here where it talks about like spirits in nature and ghosts and clans and clan magic and relics and their codes. The warriors have codes. There's beast cults and lycanthropy, and then how they deal with the Chironti, which is the other tribe. And then you've got your list of names that you could have here, and they call them Norman. And that's going to be very telling as kind of like where this culture is coming from. So you see this picture here of these different kinds of characters. It talks about clan trees. One of the things that I read that inspired this culture was, Kirk Botchell is going to do a lot of research. So it's very heavily researched. And he looked at warrior codes and codes of conduct across a variety of different warrior cultures, samurai and Plains Indians as just two examples, a lot of different types throughout history. But one of the inspirations for the way that the culture is going to come together was the idea of like how there were Norsemen, right? Viking types who explored and came to North America very, very early on, like, hundreds of years before Columbus and that group, like in the 15th century. You had Vikings who were exploring in North America and encountering native cultures, and they were driven away. Okay. So the Vikings didn't really create a lot of long-term societies here. Okay, they explored and there was an impact, but they didn't stay here long term. But one of the inspirations for the Nor, or the Norman, as you see here, Knorrman, is the idea of what would have happened if the Vikings had stayed and they'd integrated in with the native cultures, and what would that might have looked like had they stayed long enough. And that's one of the inspirations for people. I think that's really interesting. I love that idea and how to integrate those two cultures and kind of make one unique blending. So that's kind of where the setting kind of came from for the Norman. And then you see all these different kits here. We talked about kits before. There are a ton in here. So the Backlasher, which is the Cold of the Hawk, Battle Dancers, Cold of the Mountain Lion, Blood Juggler, Cold of the Otter. So you see all these different ones are around these like different totem animals. Bone Breakers, Cold of the Ram. And it just keeps going. Fire lizards, stags, foxes, hyenas, eagles. And you've got priest kits, shapeshifters. You've got storm priests. Just really flavorful stuff. Your rogue kits are companions, which have a strong affinity for the animal children of the War Mother. That's one of the kind of deities that they worship. And you've got scavengers and wastrels and weasels. And then your wizard kits are fun. You've got seers. Well, that's the only one. And then you've got your codes. So again, it talks about like, these are your codes of your warriors. And it talks about this is how you run Norman style characters. And so it talks about like creating this code and what that means to you when you're role playing. These are all role playing guides. So extend kindness to those who cross your door, declare yourself, assume the claim of a kinsman who has died and cannot resolve it on his own, avenge the killing of a kinsman. Never strike your opponent without warning. Don't engage in mortal combat with an opponent who is less than your equal. Never strike an opponent till he's ready to receive your blow. So if you know, like the kind of the code of Bushido and the samurai, that's coming a lot. Is you can see it in here. Don't gang up on an opponent. Don't mock your opponent. Don't pursue a foe fleeing from the field. And then you have codes of the hunter, and that's different, right? And then you have all these ideas of like subdual besting, which is an optional rule, which is a tradition similar to like counting coups says. So a Nor who approaches an opponent, taps the foe harmlessly with a weapon or a stick, and then walks away without being struck himself, is considered to have bested his opponent. And so there's rules for like how you kind of do that. And then it talks about law, duels, equipment. So these are very low level of technology. So they're usually like Bronze or Iron Age in terms of like what they have available of the two different cultures here. And so it goes through that. There's scarring. And it talks about that and what that means for your character and the receiving scars and the effects of scars, whether you're weathered or hacked. There's celebrating, there's luck, which is an optional rule. You have all these new non-weapon proficiencies: boasting, revelry, foraging, pacify. And here's your guardian juggernauts. These are your like totemic. You can see the illustration here by Todd Lockwood. These are like like I said, like your primitive mechs. They're like these kind of animated totemic juggernaut things that they build, which I think are really an interesting concept for these people. You have stone ones as well. You have wicker ones. And then, it just kind of goes on and on. It talks about like all the different types of stuff. You've got your new spells. I'm not going to get into that too much. Talismans, the different clans, And then it gets into the DM's lore book. And then this goes through all the different clans that are there and the calendar. And there's a little bit of kits in here on the Charanti. And if you know, the idea with this is that Jeff Grubb wanted both the Isle of War, and the Isle of Destiny for the Charanti and the Isle of War for the Nor. He wanted them to come out simultaneously so that as a player, you wouldn't be biased towards one or the other because they came out at the same time. But TSR didn't publish them that way. They published them consecutively instead of concurrently. And so because the Nor one came out first, and then even looking a little bit at the art here on the Isle of Destiny one, it does sort of look like these guys, the Charanti, are probably supposed to be the bad guys, and the Nor like the noble warriors, like the noble savage kind of concept. And it wasn't supposed to be like that. And so I think that's why there's a little bit of Charanti stuff in here just to kind of give you a flavor. You've got your adventure hooks and things like that. And again, talking more about the culture, some little ideas of like running an adventure. There's to regain honor lost is a little adventure that they're going to throw in here. Okay, so that's going to be, there's your map for the Jakandor Isle of War. And the maps, it's going to be the same for both, but they're going to have different things marked. Okay, so that is the Isle of War. Now let's quickly look at the Isle of Destiny. Now this particular one, it is sort of a decadent society, but they're pragmatic. And the big thing is, like I said, they're necromancers, but they don't use it for evil. So the premise here is kind of like the society has fallen on bad times. There's a magical plague. I'm not going to get into the weeds on this, but there's a plague that basically affects all the magic users and all of their magic items and weapons. And it attaches itself to magic. And so it'll go away for a while once everyone's kind of died out, but it's still around. And then once new people start using magic again, it will spread and the cycle just keeps repeating and repeating. So the society's kind of, it was once very, very powerful and ancient, and it's kind of fallen, it's a fallen empire essentially. And these are the people that are left. And they are eventually going to be attacked by the Nor, who settle here and try to kill all the magic users. And that's what's going to bring the Charanti together, because they tended to be a little bit more like in conflict with each other. But they're going to band together to try to fight back against the Nor. And so that's where you sort of have this balance of what's on the island now, is you've got the Charanti and the Nor that have different goals. And the Charanti aren't bad. They're trying to, reclaim their former glory, and they use necromancy. Just it's a tool almost. It's not done for like evil purposes. And I think that's a unique way to approach necromancy. So this is all, again, the details on the Charanti and their religion and how they approach the Nor and their names and their characters and their different types of kits that they have. And so they talk about common wizard traits and, the different castes of wizards, and then they have all the different kits. Again, you've got artificers and finders and galvanists and porters and renders. So I love that they created new kits for this that are flavorful and are built into the setting, as opposed to just reusing kits from, like, say, the Complete Wizard's Handbook as an example, talking about, magic user kits or wizard kits. Because these are designed specifically for the setting. And Jakandor is, I think, a very good example of mechanics and setting working together to kind of create something new and unique. So it's a perfect way to look at, like I said, perfect example if you're looking for how to integrate those two ideas of mechanics and setting. So, you've wardens and dilettantes, and you've got bandits and surgeons and companions and guildsmen. These are all, these ones are now rogue kits. You've got scribes. And then your priest kits, you've got cultists and jurists and pantheists and philosophers and Fanhotepic. And then you've got your warrior kits, Guardian. That's just one. And the warrior kit, it's an interesting one. It's sort of a blend of like fighter magic user. And these are the guys that sort of run the, or kind of like, or oversee the undead during, combat, or during, just like for things that they have to do. The Guardians are the ones who kind of oversee that. So it says they're the commanders of the undead Charanti armies, and exemplars of Charanti ideals, and yet the objects of the contempt of many members of the scholar class, because they're not full magic users, right? So it says they can use magical items normally available to warriors, of course.
But the Guardian who has the Read Magic non-weapon proficiency can use the Scrolls of Priest spells at 8th level and Scrolls of Wizard spell at 10th level. So Read Magic becomes not a spell, but a non-weapon proficiency that you can take. So some of these people might have that. So it's kind of interesting. It goes into, again, the scholarly class, the outcasts. You've got Scholar Priests, Rogues, Scholar Wizards, and Scholar Warriors. You've got Guild Priests. Like everything has guild scholars. You've got outcasts for all of those. And then their ideal of duty and justice, party construction, and you've got mentors and character advancement, all that kind of stuff. Then you have your new rules and tools and your guilds. I know I'm going through this pretty fast, but my intent is to not help you to be able to play the setting. Like you can buy it. You can buy these at Drive-Thru RPG if you want to play this. Now, interestingly enough, the Isle of Destiny, which is the one we're looking at now, is not available at Drive-Thru RPG. I don't know why. Only the first and third books are available. And people keep asking, like, how come Isle of Destiny isn't available? And there's been no answer yet. And I searched and I couldn't find it. So this one is not from Drive-Thru RPG. It has new spells and magic, of course, which makes sense here. And then you've got your appendices of important characters and things like that. And, you know, that's going to kind of be that part of the book. Then you've got your DM's lore book. And so it's going to go into managing magic, undead resources. It's going to talk about the Nor and how they approach the Nor. And then it's going to talk about graduation exercise, which is going to be like the adventure that they're going to put in here. Okay. So that's going to be kind of like the short version of this one. And then you see here the island and all of their different settlements put on here. Now, what's really interesting, I think, here is that these settlements are kind of like isolated and they're kind of walled off from each other. And rather than traveling on roads, they use like these special portals. So they can move from portals like instantaneously from one of their little villages or settlements, whatever you want to call it, to another. Whereas like the Nor use traditional trade routes and roads and things like that. So that's kind of like another difference between these two, like how they work together. So that is a look at that one. Now let's just briefly look at the Land of Legend. This is really, like I said, just adventures. So you've got, how to set up the conflict in the setting. You've got your random encounter table, and then you've got your Island of Fire, Vengeance at the Great Drum. Like these are all your different adventures, right? So they're pretty cool. They're very flavorful. Setting up the conflict between the two at the beginning, that's very helpful. You've got hero versus self, all these different ideas for helping a DM figure out how to incorporate these concepts into a campaign. So hero versus nemesis, hero versus society, hero versus nature. That's the kind of conflict that you can put all into your games and talking about that. And that's really helpful. And again, that's regardless of any setting that you have. Then it does get into the setting and the gazetteer kind of thing and talks about the different areas. There's new sites in here that weren't on the previous two maps that you saw before. So there's new stuff in here. So you're adding to the campaign setting. And then again, you're getting into your adventures. Okay. So what are some of the mechanics? It's got, like you said, all these different kits. It's got like 20 or more different kits, for all the different, cultures and things like that. And then you've got the cultural rituals and the codes that's like detailed for your Nor. And then you've got your necromantic rules and stuff like that for your Taranti. And then you've got with the, this section here that we're looking at, the Land of Legend, you have all this DM material on how to run episodic encounters. There's like mini war games in here that involve those juggernauts. And there's like a little mini kind of war game section on that. And then there's like all these set piece and location based stuff, very hex crawl like. So all that is detailed in here with like new maps and locations and all that kind of stuff. So I think that that's really, really kind of fun. Now, it was criticized kind of for critiqued, I should say, for the staggered releases. Had they all come out at once, I think people would have had a better sense of the relationship between the Nor and the Taranti, and also that the Taranti weren't really the bad guys, because that was the whole point of this. And it was really just kind of overshadowed at the end because it came out at the very, very tail end. TSR had kind of stopped publishing some stuff. They even stopped publishing Dragon Magazine for a while because they couldn't pay their printer. And people were starting to sort of move on. And then Wizards swept in and with an influx of capital, tried to fix a lot of things and get things printed again. But a lot of people had kind of moved on and found other things. And so it just kind of gets overlooked. And this is the one where I was saying, like in my community post, that a lot of people said, like, well, I've heard of Council of Wyrms and Hollow World. I've never heard of this one. And I was like, well, hopefully that you learned something and see like, a late era TSR setting and that it surprised you and maybe gave you some ideas here. And it's the last setting that Jeff Grubb's going to do for TSR. So as far as like the stuff that you can steal from modern day play, like an idea, of course, is that dual culture framing. I love that idea of running your next campaign arc with two mutually exclusive perspectives. Okay. So, handing out like a player packet for each side, and your players could be on different sides of sort of the same conflict, or make them pick a side, hand them the things and say, like, these are what you can pick from. Maybe they all pick the same one. You want them to pick the same one, but don't make it easy for them. One's not the good guys and one's aren't the bad guys. Or maybe you could play it two different times. Once play it as the Tronti and another time play it as the Nor, and just see like what it's like, what happens playing on a different side of the conflict. Okay. So I think that, it can make just it adds that morally gray aspect that I think a lot of people enjoy. I love the totemic juggernaut thing. And there's rules in here for that. And that's something that you can put into a campaign. It's sort of like a golem with a personality quirk. And I think that's a really fun way of looking at it. So, like maybe the stone jaguar, juggernaut, only obeys if it's offered a blood tribute, things like that. Those are little ideas that you can incorporate into pretty much any game. And the PCs might befriend that juggernaut, or they might fight it, or they might use it as like an ally during a siege, something like that, right? So I love that. The ritual codes for the Nor are great for ideas for like warrior cultures. If you really want to expand your warrior types beyond just like I hit it with my sword, having these ideas of, and it doesn't have to be the ones that are in here. They can just inspire you. Like I must never refuse a challenge in a single combat, like that kind of thing. The reframing of the necromancy, I think, is a great thing to look at, presenting the undead not as villains, but as ancestor guides. And, imagining like your skeleton sentries as sort of like giving tactical advice as an example. So you don't have to fight them all the time. You could use them in a different way. And I think that's a fun, unique way to approach using undead. And then just the mini campaign design. I really like the idea of you could either use two DMs, one DM's the Tronti and one DM's the Nor, and play it with two different groups, or you could play them in sequence, like I said earlier, and having this like finite arc, using it as an inspiration for like sort of a 6-episode mini campaign where you play 3 as the Tronti and 3 as the Nor, like I said. So I think that's a fun idea that you can take from this. But again, I'd love to hear from folks who played this setting. What did you think? And what were the things that you think I should have covered, or what were your favorite parts of it? And so again, share all that in the comments below. Okay, let's look at our final setting that we're going to be going over here. And this is Hollow World from 1990. So this was a box set, and it's written here, you can see, by Aaron Alston. And Aaron unfortunately passed away back in, I think, 2014. And he was young. So it was very unfortunate. I remember Aaron was one of the designers whose names that I knew, and I was shocked when I heard that he had passed away. But he wrote a lot of Mystara works. Well, he originally wrote Gazetteer 1, which was the Grand Duchy of Keramikos. And that kind of kicked off that Gazetteer series. But he originally worked on in the role-playing game field. He was an editor, writer at Space Gamer magazine, and later started Fantasy Gamer magazine. These were sort of like competitor magazines to Dragon, if you want to think of it that way. But they were popular enough that like there used to be ads for Space Gamer magazine in Dragon. It was like a lot of times, I think on the back cover, they would tell you to subscribe. And then in 1983, he became a freelance game designer. So he'd been doing it for quite a while, and wrote a ton of Star Wars novels and related novels. But also wrote, he was the person responsible for doing the 1991 Rules Cyclopedia, which is going to come out after this campaign set. But the Rules Cyclopedia, which was sort of like the Beckme line all in one book, but without the Immortals section. The Immortals stuff would be added on later in another supplement. But the Rules Cyclopedia, I've talked about here on the channel before, but for a lot of folks, especially old school gamers, that's like their Desert Island D&D book, because it is classic D&D, and it's everything you need in one book: monsters, treasures, characters, everything, spells, equipment, whatever you're looking for. It's all in a single book. Okay, so that is Aaron Alston. Now you also see, well, it was kind of overseen by the line editor at the time, which was Bruce Hurd. So Bruce is still with us, and he still creates D&D compatible content, including he has a setting that is very similar or inspired by his work when he worked on the Mystara setting, the Mystara setting. And I always forget the name of his setting. I apologize. I want to say Caledonia, but I don't think that's correct. But I'll put it up here on the screen. Bruce is very active on Facebook and different like Facebook groups that deal with like, say, Beckme era D&D. And seems like a really nice guy. And very, very creative. So I loved his series that he wrote in Dragon Magazine. It was called Voyage of the Princess Ark. And that was responsible for helping to develop parts of the Mystara campaign setting later on, like later era stuff, like other parts of the world that weren't explained in the original Gazetteer series. Okay, so the art cover here, I'm just going to go over one of the artists. And this is by Fred Fields. So Fred was born, I think, in Kentucky, but went to art school in Cincinnati and then moved to Chicago and was involved in advertising, which I always have an affinity for because, as most of you know, I think if you've watched the channel before, I own a boutique ad agency that I started. It's not an art type of advertising. It's what's called media planning and buying. So it's more numbers based. But anyway, I always have an affinity for folks who got their chops in advertising. But he does his first Dragon Magazine cover in 1988, Dragon Magazine number 142. And then he does some work on the Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, Greyhawk Ruins, the cover, I think, for the Book of Artifacts. And he does some Magic the Gathering cards over the years. So, but this is his cover art here for the Hollow World campaign setting. So, this is a box set. It's going to include a 128-page DM book, a 64-page player's book, and then a 32-page book of adventures, and then, of course, maps. So the premise here is that there's a lost world beneath Mystara. It's what it says on the box. The known world isn't flat. And I love that they called it the known world here. They still weren't calling it Mystara or Mystara. I always say Mystara, and I know most people say Mystara or Mystara. It says it isn't flat, but it is hollow. And I thought that was really funny. So this is in the vein of like those Jules Verne stories, like, Journey to the Center of the Earth, or is it Voyage to the Center of the Earth, whatever it is. But the Edgar Rice Burroughs, like his Pellucidar series, Tarzan at one point even goes to Pellucidar into the underworld or the Hollow World. And if you're a Gen Xer like me, you probably grew up on Saturdays watching Land of the Lost. That's very, very similar concept, right? So there is a red sun underneath the world that is created by one of the immortals. So the thing that you need to know about the known world or Mystara is that there are no gods, there are immortals. And the immortals were once mortal. So that's why that Beckme series, it leads you through to the point where your player characters even could become immortals. And those are sort of like the gods. They're not really gods, but that's the equivalent, right? And so there's an immortal who working with other immortals to take care of the civilizations and the societies and the flora and fauna that are in this hollow part of the world. I think it's a she. She puts like a little pinprick in the fabric of energy so that it creates this red sun, so that there's light and heat and things like that in the hollow part of the world. So it's populated by all these cultures that are like preserved from Mystara and don't exist anymore. And so, but you've heard of them, right? So it's like they've got like the Azcans, which are like Aztecs. You've got Oltecs. You've got Nithians, which are like ancient Egyptians. You have Millennians, which are like Greco-Romans. You have Traldar, which are like sort of Bronze Age Greeks. And there's more and more. We're going to see all those cultures as we get in here, but it's also got like dinosaurs and megaflora and megafauna, and just, it's very pulpy. And I love pulp style adventures like this. And then it has all these new immortals that weren't explained before, like in the Gazetteer series. And probably the most interesting one is Ka, the Preserver, who is a sentient, millions of years old T-Rex that achieved immortality. And Ka is sort of the main creator of this hollow world society. Okay, so very pulp, very call back to the 1981 Isle of Dread adventure, which I've talked about here on the channel before, and it's meant more for exploration, not for like nation building. Okay, so let's get into it now. We're actually going to start with the player's guide for this particular one, which is book 2, but let's just get into it and see what we're looking at. So it talks about the character classes, and it says the character classes known to you are all available here. However, not all of them are available in all locations. Some human cultures, for instance, might not have any thieves, it says. And so it's going to get into the backgrounds. It's going to talk about experience levels. There's limits on spells. So it says the following clerical spells simply don't work within the hollow world. So this is one of these times where like they're really, again, integrating the mechanics and the setting. And so the setting is making it so it's saying these things don't work in the setting. And that's one of the things, I guess, because I grew up with settings like this, where it was okay to have a setting where certain mechanics or certain things or certain classes or races or spells or equipment didn't exist in that world. That's why I am coming from the school of thought of like, if I create a campaign setting, it's okay for me to tell my players, no, you can't play that because it doesn't exist in my setting. And I know a lot of people don't like that. And they're like, oh, if it's in the player's handbook, then I should be able to play it. Like, player's handbook has Dragonborn, so I want to play a Dragonborn, figure out how to put it into your setting. And that's fine if you want to play that way. And I know a lot of people want to be really open and be like, oh, if they really have their heart set, I'll figure out how to make that work. And I guess I do appreciate people who have that level of flexibility, and maybe I'm just not very flexible. I try to be, but there's times where like I have a vision for the world that I've spent time creating, and I think it's okay to say, hey, these are the things that are different in this world, and because of that, these races and or classes or whatever don't exist. But here they're telling you limits on useless spells, limitations on who can be a druid, and experience levels for druids. Magic users, same thing. There's spells that don't work. And then it's going to get into like new races and classes. And one of the things that's interesting in here is that in order to be a spellcaster, whether you are a magic user or a cleric, you have to have a minimum ability score of 16. Usually it was 9. I think it was 9. It might have been 13 in this one. I think it's 9, but you got a bonus to your experience points if you had a 13 or higher. But in this particular case, you can't be those classes unless you have a 16 in that ability score. And remember, these are days where you're typically rolling your ability scores with 3d6, or maybe you're rolling 4d6 drop lowest, but you're rolling them in order. And the order of the bit. So if you didn't get a 16 on, the second, which is intelligence, that usually these were listed strength, intelligence, wisdom, and then dexterity, constitution, charisma. So if you didn't roll a 16 for your intelligence, you couldn't be a magic user. Well, this is also telling you that, typically elf in basic D&D, which I'm going to call this line basic, which includes, BX and also BECMI. Elf, dwarf, and halfling are character classes. They're not races. They are classes. So they're kind of distinct that way. And the elf in basic D&D typically is a combination fighter magic user. And so because of that, they have a much higher experience point threshold. So to move to level 2, they have to gain 4,000 experience points. You see it as a normal elf, because they can fight, they can wear armor, use any weapon. They fight just as well as fighters, and they can cast magic spells just as well as magic users while wearing armor. So that's a very powerful class. And so this is telling you, well, if you want to be an elf like that, you have to have a minimum 16 in your intelligence. And if your intelligence is 15 or lower and you want to be an elf, you're going to be an elf fighter or an elf warrior. And so basically it's just stripping out the magic and creating new experience point tables for what an elf warrior would be like. So that's technically a new class that we're going to see in here. We're going to see a lot more though, but that's one. And then it gets into shamans and Mokani, and it says several of the monster races are now allowed for use as player characters. Have shamans and Mokani. See your DM, Master DM's book. So I talked about that in my review of the BECMI line and how it was different from other versions of D&D. So I talked about shamans and Mokani there, but they're included in this particular setting. And so it's going to keep going on. And then one of the more interesting things here is it's going to have the skill system. So the BECMI line starts to have skills developed in certain adventures and also in the Gazetteer series, where it's going to explain that they work very similarly to AD&D non-weapon proficiencies. They're usually tied to like an ability score, and it's typically a D20 roll under kind of mechanic. But you're going to have, and some of them don't work that way, but a lot of them do. And but they call them skills here, and it's a skill system. Well, if you know the rules cyclopedia, you know that skill system is incorporated into that book, but you're first going to see it incorporated where it's going to take all those skills that are relevant to the setting from the Gazetteer series and combine them all into one cohesive skill system. And we first see that here in the Hollow World. So you see, it talks all about your strength skills, intelligence skills. It breaks them up and, by ability score. And, that's your skill system. You've got weapons and armor restrictions, and then you've got all of these different, cultures. So you have the Antalians. It says, our ancestors of the outer world, Ostlanders, Vestlanders, and men of the Soda Fjord, which are like Vikings in the known world. But these are people that explored and are left here. And these are like the original version of these people. Like they're the ancestors. And so it talks all about them. But then it says character classes, and it says the Antalians are humans. And so they can belong to any of the human character classes. So you're seeing this kind of start to be almost like these are like different cultures, but they have different abilities. So you see like they have cultural missile weapons and cultural armor and the kind of weapons that their clerics can use. And it's not just blunt weapons. These clerics can use axes. Okay, so that's different. And what weapons their thieves can use and what weapons their magic users can have. These magic users can wear leather armor and use hand axes. So these are different than your standard humans, right? So then you have your Azcans again. And then you've got, basically all these different cultures, right? But you also have beastmen, which are humanoid ancestors of modern races of orc, goblin, gnoll, troll, ogre, and so forth. So this is a whole separate culture of beastmen. And then there's shaman and Wukani. And then you've got black lore elves. You have all different kinds of elves. You've got brute men, gentlefolk elves, the elves of Icevale. You have Hutakans. I'm going to say Hutakans. I don't know how to pronounce that. Hutaakans, which are jackal-headed humanoids. And it says they bear a superficial resemblance to gnolls, but they're actually an older, far more sophisticated race. So you're seeing, and these are all new classes, because remember, race is class in this particular one. You have the Genites, who are nomadic cavalrymen who follow vast herds of aurochs, which are an ancient breed of oxen all over the plains of the southern hemisphere. So they're breaking up the cultures here, but they're giving them, I would call them mechanical changes as far like their weapon and armor restrictions and things like that, I think are really interesting. You have your Kogolor dwarves. You have your Krugel orcs. So this is your orc guy here. They're horse riders, mercenary cavalrymen, it says. And, you've got your Kubits, which are 18-inch tall human-like beings. And you have your Malfegi lizard men. You have your Merry Pirates. So someone on the community post on YouTube was very excited to talk about the Merry Pirates. And there they are. They're not just pirates. They are Merry Pirates. And you have your Millennials. Again, those are like your Greco-Roman people. And you've got your Nithians. You can see there your ancient Egyptian, kind of model, your Oltec. You have your Shattenalfen, which are pale subterranean elves, and they have their own culture. You have your Tenagoro, you have your Traldar, and you have your tribesmen of Neathar. Just goes on and on. So you have all these different cultures. Now we're going to get into our world book. And this is going to talk about the history of the world. It's going to give you the atlas of all the different empires and how the immortals interact, and then your campaigning. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So I think that's kind of where I would prefer to focus is on the campaigning section. Because, again, this wasn't intended to teach you all about this particular setting, but you have your timeline here, which helps to kind of understand what's been going on, and your diagram of the Hollow World and your maps, of course, and all the different cultures. So this is just the atlas here of all the different nations and cultures and things that are located in different parts of the Hollow World. And then it gets into the immortals. And these are all going to be new. A lot of them are going to be new because they're specific to this particular setting. And so you've got, there's just a ton of them. So I was looking for Ka here because there he is. So here's Ka the Preserver, also known as the Amber Serpent. And and it describes it more in the history section, but he was a bipedal carnivorous, 45-foot long reptile in the ancient history of the known world, and developed intelligence somehow, and eventually discovered the path of the polymath. And again, you'd have to see some of my earlier videos to understand these different spheres of magic and that work. But he finally became an immortal of the sphere of matter. And it was who was convinced using the hollow world to preserve endangered races and cultures. So he persuaded the other immortals to kind of help him out and guide in the development of the hollow world. So that's interesting. You have this essentially Tyrannosaurus Rex-like being, this reptilian creature that gains sentience and intelligence, and decides that he wants to preserve these ancient civilizations from the surface world as they're dying out and keep them underneath in the hollow world. I think that's a really kind of unique approach to this. So here's all your other, immortals that you have. You have your quick reference chart. And then it gets into campaigning again. So it goes in all these things of like the sense of wonder, and you've got perpetual daylight, which is a factor, right? You have stable weather. There's no seasons. You don't have all the stuff that you'd have on the surface by virtue of living in the interior core of this planet. You have lodestones, dinosaurs, and prehistoric animals, ancient cultures. Travel is hard. There's no easy way to get back up to the surface world. You have your scholarly NPCs, and you have all this kind of stuff. Now, one of the things that's really interesting in here is this idea called the spell of preservation. But the idea is that the way that this works is that as a PC, or as a member of a culture, you want to stay and preserve your culture. And it's not a choice. It's sort of thrust upon you by virtue of where you live and this spell that's there that impacts everybody who lives here. So you're not trying to mingle your cultures. You're trying to preserve your culture the way it was, the foods, the music, the lore, your fighting style, your art, all that kind of stuff. You want to keep it the way that it is. And so it's going to say that like you should kind of have some negatives happen if you try to change that. And so it talks about like some of the cultures don't have advanced like ways of like, ironsmithing or steelsmithing, things like that. So they don't have armor, right? And so it says like, well, you shouldn't penalize them if they're in a fight with someone who has armor, because their culture doesn't use that. But then it sucks to play that character, but you don't want to make them feel bad for making that choice. So it talks all about like how, as a DM, how you can sort of navigate some of those choices to validate the person's choice who decided to play one of those characters. I think that's a really interesting, kind of examination of how to deal with some of these things that like people hadn't figured out how to manage that yet. Right. It talks about using the hollow world with other settings, how to modify it. I think that's really kind of fun. So then you've got your adventures here. There's a bunch of them. And again, I'm not going to really go through these, especially for folks if you want to play them. You've got some new monsters in here, Allosaurus, a lot of dinosaurs. And you would have seen these dinosaurs in the advanced D&D monster manual, but these are new for this version of D&D, the so-called basic D&D. Cave bears, giant eagles, giant bisons, things like that. So some really cool stuff that kind of, really sets the tone for that kind of pulp era stuff. And then it gives you like by climate, all the different monsters that might be there: Arctic, mountain, ocean, desert, because you do have all these different climates under here. It's just, they don't change over time, like with the seasons. And then you have your really cool maps here. I love this style of map. Like these hex maps, I think are really, really fun. They're very colorful. So, it's unfortunate you can't see the map all at once. It's all broken up. And then you have your outer world planetary map of like where all these different nations and things exist. And your outer world Arctic cap and Antarctic cap. So you can see where everything's located. And so those are your maps, as I said. And then that's kind of going to be it as far as like looking at this really quickly again. But I love the pulpy tone. Like I said, there's a lot of new mechanics that are presented in here. You have that elf warrior class. You have all those new classes, like race as class, like the lizard men and the different orcs and all that kind of stuff. I love the cultural backgrounds, again, that are in here. And there's a lot of them that are presented. And, you can has a whole play style of like using PCs from the known world, discovering this land of all these like preserved nations and cultures from ancient history from the surface world. So now this is one of the ones where a lot of folks, again, in my community post, said specifically that like they definitely remember this. So a lot of people said they still have it and they liked it. It got a lot of love. Like if you love Mystara, there's no reason that you wouldn't love this. I don't think. I mean, it's right in that same vein. But again, it's coming out in 1990 and it's competing with all those other settings that I talked about earlier, like Spelljammer and Ravenloft and Alchemy and Dark Sun. They're all coming out in succession. And while those were all created for second edition advanced D&D, a lot of people just didn't necessarily get pigeonholed into only using one system or the other. And so it's very possible that people from playing advanced D&D might have taken the Hollow World and wanted to use it in their game. And then vice versa. People playing basic D&D might have grabbed another setting that was created for advanced D&D, like Ravenloft, for example, or Spelljammer. So it kind of just gets overshadowed by this, huge dump of settings that are coming out all the time. There's a little connection in here to Blackmore, but I think a lot of people were hoping for more. And, I think it's very popular, like I said, among, people who really love the known world or love that Mystara setting. And there have been some kind of updates or, conversions in the OSR community. As far as stuff that you can steal for your game, there's a lot. So, there's this idea that like, as an example, just an idea, a campaign idea, you could have your PCs have ancestors that came from one of these ancient cultures that disappeared, and your PC knows that they're from there, like they're descended from there, but they're part of a different nation now. But then they discover that culture still exists, in the hollow of the earth. And I think that could be kind of a fun way to preserve some of these different cultures from the history of a world. It creates this instant sort of drama of like displacement with recognition. Okay. Now one thing that you can do that I think would be really fun when you're running the game at the table, if you're running a Hollow World, setting, whether it's a short expedition or whether it's a whole campaign. I guess it could get tiring if it was a whole campaign, but a thing that you could do that would be really fun if you're the DM and you're hosting the game, switch your light bulb out, get like a red light bulb, or if you've got one of those smart bulbs that can change color, like I have one of those, it allows you to change color and turn it red to represent the red sun while you're playing. I mean, you have to make sure people can read and see and all that kind of stuff, but I think that'd be a really fun kind of way to like immerse yourself in the atmosphere when you're running a game like this. I think that the culture clash sandbox is the thing that I love so much about Mystara or the known world, but also about, it's present here in the Hollow World, having these different cultures where you can pit pirates against Aztec warriors and then Greco-Roman, warrior types. I love that kind of mishmash of things where they can all exist at the same time. It's one of the things I loved about like the world of Conan the Barbarian. And it's one of the things I loved about the known world for D&D. And again, the Hollow World is just an extension of that. And those are things that you can do. Just grab one of these cultures and dump it into your game and have your players discover a region that is populated by people from that particular culture. And then do like a mashup where you can have, different people against different people. As far as like very specific, like mechanical things that you can do with something like this, these cultures, these different human cultures where it talks about their language and the character classes that they might have access to. And again, like their weapons and armor and their cultural weapons and what weapons their clerics can use, magic users and thieves. I think that's a really fun way to kind of explore the culture. Now, I know magic users usually have more, weapon restrictions, but open it up and see what happens. You can try that out. And it's a good way of distinguishing the different cultures from each other with how they approach their fighting styles and all that kind of stuff. I love the cultural sections in here. I think they're really, really fun. And then of course there's that skill system. So I don't personally use skill systems in the BX game that I run for my daughter and her friends. I don't think that class and level games need skills, but I know a lot of people love them and they want to have them in there. So if you're playing an OSR style game like BX that doesn't have a skill system, like say you're playing old school essentials and there's no skill system in there, you can grab the skill system from this supplement here and drop it right into an OSE game. And it's going to work perfectly because BX which is OSE, and BECME are like 98.9% compatible, probably even more than that, right? They're the two probably closest editions of D&D that are compatible more so than any other distinct editions would be BX and BECME. And so, in fact, I would say, if you know this analogy, they're more compatible than third edition is with 3.5. So that just gives you, because those two are very, very compatible, right? So this skill system will work perfectly in an OSE game if you're looking for something to drop in like that and you want that kind of skill system. So those are just a few thoughts. Hollow World is a big, massive setting. I might revisit it at some point for more details if people are looking for that. Although I'm hoping I gave you a flavor here so that you could kind of get a sense of like what the setting is like and why, it was very different. There were no Hollow World settings as far as I'm aware of at the time. And I think that the approach with having Ka the Preserver kind of wanting to preserve all these cultures under there, giving a reason for why the world hasn't changed. Why are all these prehistoric animals and these ancient societies, why are they under here and why haven't they changed over time? And it's because these immortals have taken pains to make sure that they're going to keep them that way. And I think that's a really fun approach and way to explain these kind of, lost in time, these lost world cultures. And, but, I would love to, again, to hear your guys' thoughts on the Hollow World and what you think. Because, it's another one that I was really interested in. I was super interested in. It's just, my group was moving on and we were playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay at the time. And so I slowed down my buying of D&D stuff, and I bought a couple Gazetteers, which I really loved. And, I've longed for a while to get the Hollow World setting. I just don't have it yet. So I'd love to hear from folks who love this setting and kind of see what you think. But that's going to kind of be our look at these three specific settings. And, we've got Counts of Wyrms, we've got Jakandor, we have the Hollow World, and they're all these ambitious experiments that TSR was trying in its final years, as it's kind of like, Hollow World is still, you're in the thick of the TSR era, but just 7 years later, TSR is not going to exist anymore as an independent company. It's going to be owned by Wizards of the Coast. And none of these settings, I would say, really became all that famous. So again, Jakandor's one where people in the community post was like, I've never heard of that before. And Counts of Wyrms, more people had heard of it, but there are some who had only heard of Hollow World. They're like, I haven't heard of the other two. So, I don't think any of them became, like I said, they're definitely not famous. They don't have that, the legs or the legacy that you might think of, but they all offer really fresh campaign tools, ways to approach a campaign, like I said, and just, keep it fresh, keep it different, and all have very, very useful content that you can use today, whether you're using mechanics or whether you're using just ideas for building these different campaigns. So, you definitely wouldn't need to take these campaigns settings and adopt them wholesale. You can just steal some of the mechanics, some of the ideas, the conceits, the concepts, and then use them to sort of just refresh your table, keep things new and different. Okay, but that's just what I think about it, and I would love to hear your thoughts on these settings. Which one was your favorite from today, and which one do you think you would never use? I just share all of that in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. And then, of course, while you're down there, you'll find places to join me on social media. You'll find links to my blog. You'll find links for all those places to support Daddy Roll the One, that I talked about earlier. All that's going to be down in the show notes below. And then just as a reminder, definitely come back and check out the comments. So just as an example, in last week's video, I talked about, 3 kind of forgotten TSR era games. I talked about, 5, it was 5. I talked about Dawn Patrol, and I talked about Gangbusters and Indiana Jones and the Conan role-playing game, and then Buck Rogers. And, the son of one of the co-creators of Gangbusters and also the other co-creator of Gangbusters that was at TSR that created Gangbusters, both of them came into the comments to talk about different aspects of that game and like what was going on and to correct a few things and things like that. And that's detail that you can get in the comments. And I don't think you find that on a lot of other history channels, like having actual TSR creators at the time who worked on this stuff coming in to offer their 2 cents. So definitely check that out and make sure that you're going through those comments to see what people say. All right. So that's going to wrap this particular video up. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so very much for watching. Stay safe, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you next time. I want to give a quick shout out to friends of the channel, Emperor's Choice Games and Miniatures Corporation. You know them from our live stream where we talked about the history of the Arduin. Well, they have teamed up with the folks from Barrows and Borderlands and also the folks behind the documentary Secrets of Blackmore. It's called Fellowship of the Thing. And the three of them are releasing a combined Kickstarter of a massive old school system of box sets and books. So you're going to get a treasure hoard, over 800 pages of new classes, rules, monsters, spells, critical tables, classes, weird technology, all compatible with each other, as well as with your favorite old school system of choice. So you're going to get a limited edition reprint of the original Arduin Grimraw trilogy, a special box set version of Barrows and Borderlands, which is an OSR kind of clone game, but very science fantasy forward. And then you're going to get a roughly 200-page copy of the Lost Dungeons of Tonisberg. It's one of the earliest mega dungeons ever written, dating back to 1973, written by Greg Svensson of Dave Arneson's Blackmore Circle, using a draft copy of pre-publication Dungeons and Dragons. So if you love old school gaming history, it's an incredible collection. The link to the pre-launch page is in the description below. So please check it out and consider backing Portal to Adventure. Okay, and now for the bonus content, what I was drinking, what I was listening to when I made my notes for this video. So I'm going to do the drink first. I'm just going to slide this over for a second. And I am drinking a Negroni. I know I've done Negronis on the channel before, but this is a very special Negroni. This is a barrel-aged Negroni that my dad made before he passed away in December of last year. But he had two bottles like this. So he had one, he reused an old Whistle Pig bottle, and then he reused this Havana Club bottle. But he made a barrel-aged Negroni that he aged from August 1st of 2022 up through September 20th of 2022. So it was in there about 7 weeks. And he used a mix of gin, Tanqueray gin, Dolan sweet vermouth, Dolan Rouge, and then Campari. And then he says, when serving, use an orange. He said half wheel. I used a peel because I don't like half wheels of orange in my drink. And then he says, and use a big cube or a sphere. I used a cube, so you can see, because that's what I had. I do have spheres, but I just was lazy and I got the cube. But why am I drinking Negroni? Well, it is Negroni week. So by the time you see this, it won't be Negroni week, but it is Negroni week. It's Thursday, December 25th, as I record this. And we are in the middle of Negroni week. It started on Monday, the 22nd. So I've been drinking a different version of Negroni every night this week. Although this is special because this is the second of my dad's that I have had. He had a barrel-aged Boulevardier as well, which is a riff on a Negroni, but using whiskey instead of gin. And he had a barrel-aged one of those. So I had that, and that was the very last of it. So I poured that on Tuesday. Yesterday, I had a Negroni at my pub for lunch, and I let my bartender kind of use her own version. And tonight I'm going to be drinking something else. But today, while I'm recording, I'm having this one that my dad made. So Negroni Week is, I think, created by Imbibe Magazine. So if you are someone who enjoys culture of beverages, and they call it liquid culture. And so the thing that's fun about this magazine is it's not just booze. They do cover beer, wine, and spirits, but they also cover coffee, tea, soda. They get into like different kinds of water, and they talk, like they interview people like brewers, or they'll interview coffee makers or coffee like shop owners and things like that. And they talk about, like, there's all different equipment, but they created this thing called Negroni Week. And one of the things that it does is it helps raise money for different charities. So there's a specific charity, and I forget the name of the charity, but I buy a t-shirt every year, which the proceeds go to helping the charity. Anyway, it's a special thing to share because, again, I have a limited quantity of this because, pretty soon I'm going to be out, and my dad is gone now and won't be able to make one again. So very easy to make, though. So if you are someone who doesn't like a standard Negroni, you might enjoy this one, because now what you need to do is buy a small cocktail barrel. They're not expensive. You can probably get one for, I would guess, $30, although, I'll have to look. It's been a while since I've gotten a new one. You have to prepare it first. You have to soak it in water for a while until it doesn't leak anymore. And that's kind of like, you're priming it, you're prepping it and getting it ready. And these are charred oak barrels. And then you basically are going to make your cocktail. But you're going to, scale it up, and the Negroni is very easy because it's just equal parts. And you're going to scale it up to fit into your barrel, and you're going to put it in there, and then you're going to just taste it I would taste it every few weeks. Now, when a barrel is brand new, usually you can let it go for like as little as 2 weeks, and you're going to extract flavor and get things out of there. The more you reuse your barrel, the longer you have to leave it in, because it takes longer and longer to extract the flavor from the barrel, because you want those barrel aged qualities, that kind of caramely toasted oaky smoothness that you want. You want that in your barrel aged cocktail, and it takes longer and longer to get that out the more and more that you use. Anyway, cheers. Now, what the barrel agent is going to do is it's going to smooth this out. That was my point. So if you think that a Negroni is too sharp and you hate that bitterness of Campari, putting it in the barrel really mellows it out. You still get the flavor, but it doesn't have that sharp, bitter tang to it. And you might enjoy it a little bit better. And it's something you can do at home, and then you can impress your friends because they can't get it anywhere else. They can only get it at your house because you bought one of those. So cheers, chin chin. Cheers to my dad. Cheers to Negroni Week. All those things. Yeah, Negroni is one of my go-to cocktails, 100%. Okay, let's look at the album then. So this is not an album. It is a box set. This is Miles, the Prestige Recordings 55. There is also a Miles Prestige Recordings 54. I do not have that set. This was a birthday gift. My birthday was this last weekend. From my best friend, Jeff. And so Jeff is the one that owns the record store that I work at when I talk about that here on the channel. And I've known him, I've known Jeff since the late 80s. I'll just put it that way. So we've been friends from him moving multiple states, college, business, both of us getting married, me having a kid. He does not have kids. But anyway, this is Miles Davis Prestige Recordings 55. So what does that mean? Well, 1955 was the year it was recorded. And my friend Jeff gave this to me because he thought the 55 maybe was a fun reminder of what birthday it was for me. So that's, now you guys know how old I am. Most of you probably guessed already. And so Prestige is just the label. So this was when Miles Davis was at Prestige before he moved to Columbia. So Columbia is where he's going to release Kind of Blue. That's like his big album. Well, he did a lot of big albums at Columbia, but that was like one of his first really big ones was Kind of Blue, 1959. But this is like his first, what they call his first great quintet. So these are recordings that were made while he was at Prestige, and he did a few different albums there. So, and of course, like the Musings of Miles, I think is one. And then there's like the Quintet Sextet with Milt Jackson. And so all those were like different kind of albums that have like maybe 6 tracks each. And all of those tracks are going to be, put together here on these 3 different LPs. So you have all 3 LPs of these different sessions. So this is going to span this time period where, Miles is kind of coming into his own as a leader. So he really had started in I'd say 49 was 1949 when he puts out Birth of the Cool. But that doesn't come out that year. He records it that year. Those sessions are released originally on 78s and a few songs at a time. They were never released as a complete album. Until much later when Miles kind of got famous and then people were scrambling to find old Miles tracks and put them together. So the Birth of the Cool album, as you know it today, was never originally released in that format. But that was 1949. He plays with Charlie Parker for a while. Charlie Parker dies. Miles gets very heavily into drugs and he has to kick that habit. And in 1955, he's transitioning between some of the people that he was playing with. And then getting his new, what's going to, again, be called his new great quintet. So you see here all the different people that are playing on this. So I'm just going to point out, so Paul Bryant, Percy Heath, Milt Jackson, Jackie McLean, Oscar Pettiford, Arthur Taylor. That was kind of like people that he was playing with for some of these recordings, but they were not part of his band. They were not like his original band. But then he's going to come together and make this group that consists of Philly Joe Jones on drums, who Miles had played with before, and very famous drummer. Philly Joe is going to be playing with Miles for quite a while. Okay. And then he's going to get introduced to Paul Chambers on bass. Now, Paul Chambers and Philly Joe Jones, usually with Wynton Kelly on piano, although not always with Wynton, they're going to become known as like this very famous rhythm section where as you go through jazz albums, if you've watched this part before, you've probably heard these two names come up. They become this famous rhythm section that a lot of players are going to play with. Art Pepper's going to play with them at one point. Wes Montgomery is going to play with them. A very famous live album. Wes Montgomery plays at the half note with the Wynton Kelly Trio. And just different musicians over time. And you just see these names pop up if you know the names to look for them. So they're very famous. And then he's going to get introduced to Red Garland, who's going to play piano. And then he's eventually finally going to add John Coltrane on tenor saxophone. Now, Coltrane's eventually going to get kicked out of the band because he was hooked on heroin, and Miles said he couldn't take it anymore. And that was what was going to convince Coltrane to kick the habit and then come back and record with Miles on that kind of Blue album and a few others before Coltrane goes off and does his own thing. Okay, so that's the famous quintet. So it's Red Garland, it's John Coltrane, it's Philly Joe Jones, and it's Paul Chambers. And then, of course, you've got Miles on trumpet as the leader. Okay, so and then you've got all these different songs on here, again, spanning different recording sections. I think it's 3 different ones. It's like August, November, and I forget when the other one was. It actually talks about it a little bit here in the liner notes. So yeah, you've got August 5th and November 16th. And then I guess the first one was June 7th. So 3 different dates, 3 different groups of musicians, but coming into that great quintet. Now, Miles, again, is going to keep Paul Chambers and Philly Joe Jones and John Coltrane. He's eventually going to replace Red Garland with either Bill Evans or Wynton Kelly. It kind of depends on the song or the style that he needs at the time. But it's a very, very cool transition period. Miles is not quite into that modal sound that we're going to hear on kind of Blue, but he is moving past bebop, which was the popular style of the era. Bebop or hard bop. Hard bop's a little bit later, I guess, but he's kind of discovering his own thing. And these songs are really great. I love this box set. I've been listening to it, one that was open at my friend's shop when I worked there, which is why I think he knew that I would want to get this. So this was his gift to me. So thanks to my friend Jeff for this gift, and his partner Ellen, who owns the record store with him. I saw them for my birthday and they gave that to me. So that's Miles Davis, The Prestige Recordings, 1955. Definitely check it out. You know, Miles is one of my favorites. Cheers to Negroni Week, and thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.